And it's very funny to me that at Ohio State, they were paying their defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, more than any coordinator in the country. But Penn State upped the ante. There was also discussion about Jim Knowles and Ryan Day not necessarily seeing eye to eye. And after a few subpar performances, Jim Knowles had a bit of a talking to, and that Ryan Day was, sticking his nose in the defense a little bit more than Jim Knowles appreciated. So he heads off to Penn State to take on that challenge of trying to take down Ohio State. So Ohio State, even as the national champions, paying this coordinator the most money in college football, lose him to one of their rivals. And now they may be taking one of their rivals from the Big Ten, who they, of course, split a 2-game series with, and bringing him in to Columbus to take over the offense from Chip Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, this is like Ohio State, like you says, not everything that's glitter is always gold. And we've talked about the investment that Ohio State has made, not only with their roster, with their coaching staff, but again, this coaching change of Chip Kelly is going to be major, not only for obviously the dynamic, the culture, and the coaching staff at Ohio State, but also for the recruiting trail, because we've seen that so many storylines, especially heading to the spring. How is this going to affect the spring portal? Will any Ohio State guys end up leaving because Chip Kelly leaves? Will the new guys that come in, whoever they choose, if it's outside of who we think it might be, as far as in staff, is that going to open doors? Because some of the guys that I have on my short list, they come from big programs as well, had a lot of success, not just at their current program, but the previous programs offensively. And we know that has become a key component. Relationships matter in recruiting. So, if they go with the guy that I'm going to talk at first next, obviously the obvious choice, Ohio State wide receiver coach Brian Hartline. You when you're talking about recruiting, when you're talking about coaches, when you're talking about one of the biggest challenges that staff have faced outside of keeping up with the Joneses, is keeping roster retention. And we know we've seen it all across through the transfer portal. When coaches leave, how that can change the dynamic of a roster shift. So that's been one of the key components we've seen Ohio State really have to do, especially, I mean, with the money they put into this past season roster, grabbing the top players from the transfer portal this past season. Obviously, what they've taking, I believe it's 8 guys from this portal, 6 guys. I'm sorry, 6 guys from this winter portal, and then bringing about 25 of the top high school recruits coming in for this next upcoming class. I mean, Ohio State is setting itself up. But again, you need leadership, and that comes from your coaches. So one of the key things that, Ohio State also tries to do when trying to replace Chip Kelly is, do we stay in-house or do we bring somebody new in? And obviously the first choice that, that you have to look at too, who's definitely has a resume, is Brian Hartline. He's been a staple in the Buckeyes since 2017, and then it transitioned to the wide receivers coach. I mean, when you talk about the wideout room that's happened over there in Columbus, it's a due part to what Hartline's done. I mean, what he's done in developing Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Abuku, Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, under Hartline, Smith became, what did he? I mean, you're the Ohio State guy, Mark. But I mean, as a true freshman, what Jeremiah Smith was doing with 1,315 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns as a true freshman. And I think, he's the obvious choice. It would be an easy transition. He's familiar with the offense. He's got it. He's not only good at recruiting, he's not only, got a proven track record of developing players. He's built relationships, but recruiting, it goes back to recruiting. Hartline has been a staple in there since 2017. He knows the program ins and outs despite the transition, and he's a good recruiter. And I think that's one of the key things outside his development, what he can do, offensively. He knows the offensive scheme, so it wouldn't be this huge shakeup. He would be the obvious choice, but that sometimes, head coaches, general managers, it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes they want to bring a new guy in. So, I was kind of tossing around because, this late in the game, it's mid-season. Who do you get in? Who do you get in right now that's going to fill the shoes? Obviously, coming off a national championship, a team, and then bringing somebody else in. Some of the other guys I kind of have on the short list, or the hot board, as I like to call it, is Will Stein, the Oregon offensive coordinator. He was just, he's been in Eugene over a little bit over a year. We've seen what he's been able to do as far as developing quarterbacks. he put Bo Nix in a good spot, coming in third in the Heisman. Was very successful at UTSA. UTSA, some of these Texas universities have been a really good staple for producing not just top level talent offensively as far as athletes. UTSA, UIW, these are all teams, down here in Texas, Houston, that have been known to produce good playmakers, but they've also been good in producing good coaches to reach at a certain level. When he was at UTSA, his offense was number 9 in 2022 in total offense and number 12 in scoring offense. And, we talked about Bo Nix. He's also, Will Stein was also instrumental in helping Dylan Gabriel finally have his footing down in Eugene, also, making him a top Heisman candidate. And, he's got a good sense of how offensive runs. He was a former, obviously, for those who don't know his background, he was a former quarterback for Louisville. So he's got a strong track record in different conferences. And what I like about him, because the experience he brings, not only as a former quarterback, developing quarterbacks, but his different stops that he's made throughout his career, I think for him, he's a great plug and play guy. And we see that the revolving door, the ever changing, having to adapt and adjust. That's what I really like about Will Stein. We've seen what he's done in a short time at Oregon. He's a plug and play guy that brings a lot of different experience in plenty of different conferences. And he could be something, like I said, sometimes, as much as you want to keep it in house with going with a guy like Hartline, Will Stein's kind of appealing as well, because like I said, he can bring a new dynamic, a new factor, because Ohio State now, after winning the national championship, it's hard to stay at top. So how do you keep staying at top? Especially when you're losing the offensive coordinator who was responsible, for being able to do that.
Yeah. So to get back to Brian Hartline, Leanne, it's an interesting path for him because he was a wide receiver at Ohio State, and nobody, including myself, when he was a senior at Ohio State, saw him as an NFL receiver. He caught like 12 passes his senior season at Ohio State. He could have stuck around for his redshirt year and his fifth year at Ohio State, but he opted to go into the NFL draft. And I thought, this guy's insane. Why is he going into the NFL draft? He just caught 12 passes and he expects to get drafted. And he was just not a factor in the offense. But much of that had to do with Terrell Pryor being a running quarterback and the pass game being very limited. Brian Hartline makes himself into a Pro Bowl wide receiver with the Miami Dolphins, has 90 catch seasons, 1,000 yards. And it was really based on athleticism, of course, but he really crafted himself, really studied the position, was really a artist out there running routes. And basically he's been able to do that and take that skill set and that knowledge of how to play the position and take that to the coaching ranks. I was just reviewing, as you were talking, his NFL draft selections, and I lost count, whatever it's been, like 8 wide receivers in the last 4 years, 5 of them in the first round. He'll have another one probably with Emeka Egbuka and probably another one with Jeremiah Smith in the first round. So it's this combination of what does he do better? Is it the recruiting side? Because he's recruiting the best wide receivers in the country, but we've seen many examples of recruiting the best at any position. And if they're not developed, they're not going to be first round picks in the NFL. So he's got both nailed, the recruiting side, the development side. And of course, he can speak with a lot of authority to these kids when he can say, I've got a 10-year career with the Miami Dolphins. Look at what I did. Not that he states it that way, but he's got a ton of credibility. What's interesting also, Leanne, about his path is that at Ohio State, he's in this position a few years ago where he's just tearing it up. And Ohio State fans very fearful that somebody's going to pluck him up as an offensive coordinator. Well, Ryan Day was running the offense, so they didn't hire an offensive coordinator. So they made him the assistant offensive coordinator. They gave him a promotion just basically to say, we'll pay you more money. You need to stay. But Ryan Day still runs the offense. And then they had an interesting situation at this time last year where finally Ryan Day has the offense yanked out of his hands, can't handle it anymore. He didn't want to give it up, but people finally convinced him to, meaning his boss and others. And they wanted to go hire one of the best offensive coordinators in the game. So they initially hired Bill O'Brien, who was only there for 2 or 3 weeks, because then he got the head coaching job at Boston College. Then they go get Chip Kelly. So you're talking about 2 NFL head coaches that they got as offensive coordinator. So Brian Hartline, again, kind of had to wait in line because he's never called plays. He's never been the offensive coordinator, but he's done everything else so at an elite level that it's going to be interesting whether that's enough for them to pull the trigger and say, okay, we need to make this move to keep him here, or if they go outside the program.
No, exactly. And like I said, he's the choice that makes sense because again, there would be it's an easy transition. It wouldn't be, and it's not like they would have to bring, some of the, like I said, Will Stein, Oregon offensive coordinator, and then the next one I'm going to mention too, two guys that have been prime examples at where they win. But again, remember, as elite as these guys that I'm talking about on this board that are matching up with Hartline that could be potential candidates in replacing Chip Kelly, it's difficult as good as you are where you're coming from, even if you're the 5-star coach coming from a top winning program or a program that has a lot of momentum right now, doesn't mean that you're going to find success instantly. Again, if you bring in a new guy outside Hartline, remember that you're going to bring in you're going to open a lot of doors. You're going to bring in a lot of new things that could be a new dynamic. But also with that is you're going to have to start building relationships again. You're going to have to see how this wide receiver room, how your offensive players that you do have intact, how that's going to resonate with them. Because remember, this is not only interviewing for an offensive coordinator. This is also interviewing for a guy that you need to be your next guy up at a very quick pace as we go into spring practice, who can be a plug and play guy, who can adapt and adjust, and get these guys on board. But most of all, roster retention. I can't speak it enough. When you have a coaching change, means that there's going to be the possibility where you open yourself up where current players are going to leave, but it also brings a possibility that new players are going to come in. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic. Kind of my dark horse in this is going to Miami offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson. He just finished his second year with the Canes that led the nation total offense. Obviously, we all know how that works, averaging 532 yards and 43 points per game. He's also made stops at Kentucky, West Virginia, and Houston. In 2022, his offense there ranked number 17 in total offense, averaging 36.1. He brings a lot. He's another guy that I like, Mark, because he brings a lot of experience. And we talk so much about, not only to have you can't just have one or the other in offense anymore. You can't just, have a strong aerial attack without having a strong ground attack. And what I like about Shannon Dawson and he studied under Hal Mumme, obviously Coach Dana Holgerson, two guys, that have really been the instrument. I mean, when we're talking air raid, when we're talking, all these types of things, Shannon Dawson, that's what I like about him. I think, and he's also a heck of a recruiter as well. So, I think he would bring a different dynamic. But again, I really think that, Brian Hartline, while Stein and Dawson, would obviously bring a dude dynamic. They have a proven track record of bringing their own appeal to Ohio State. Definitely would have no problem bringing in top recruits outside, the transfer portal, high school portal. But for me, the smart choice in all this, even though I don't have a dog in this fight, would just, reward Brian Hartline not only for what he's done in developing that wideout room, also as a former player, which means having former players on staff are either hit or miss. It either works out or it doesn't. But Hartline has shown, and like you were sharing his story, Mark, nobody thought that nobody thought he was going to have a successful career, much less be a Pro Bowler in the NFL. So he's had experience at every level. He's been true to the Buckeyes. And for me, that would make the smartest and easiest transition where there would be a lot less, lot less having to deal with that. I feel like there'd be a lot less backlash. Not that nothing taken away from Will Stein or Dawson. And again, these are just kind of the guys that I've picked out that would be available, that would make sense, that would be able to bring the elite replacement and on the recruiting trail on the field instantly. Because again, there's a lot of guys out there that I think that would be great for this job, but I don't think they're ready for this job. I think that they would have to make a few more stops, as far as being able to live up to. Because now that Ohio State is on top, how do they stay there is going to be their biggest problem, and that's not a bad problem to have. But with all that, like you said, it comes we having to make sure that we have secure coaches, we retain rosters, looking ahead. So they have to bring somebody who can be a plug and play guy instantly. And again, I feel like as much as the other two candidates, I would love to see them, have an opportunity at Ohio State. I think that Brian Hartline just makes the best sense because across the board, it's more of a win-win situation. And I feel like there would be less backlash as far as retention of roster, transition, and so forth.
Yeah, in terms of your recommendation, 2017 in college football was ancient history. That was a long time ago. Brian Hartline has shown himself loyal and faithful to this program for 8 years. That's an eternity. And I know he's a young man, but still, it's a young man's game. And he has shown himself to be loyal. And he's had basically his pick of the litter where he would want to go otherwise, but he has waited and probably understood, okay, Ryan Day runs the offense. Okay, I understand Bill O'Brien's got this long, lengthy career in the NFL. Okay, I understand Chip Kelly's one of the best offensive minds in the country. But now, hey, if it's not going to be now, when's it going to be? So the Brian Hartline choice makes all the sense in the world. And I know a lot of people would make the same point that I just did a few minutes ago, that he's never run an offense, but there's all sorts of success stories of when you're a quality person and you know what you're doing. Ryan Day never ran a top college football program before. Lincoln Riley, before he went to Oklahoma, he had never been a head coach. We could go on and on. Marcus Freeman, never been a head coach. And then on the Shannon Dawson side, just to reiterate something that you said from a different angle, when you said he can recruit, Mario Cristobal doesn't hire anybody that can't recruit. Like, you have to recruit if you are going to be on Mario Cristobal's staff, because he is all about recruiting. And Shannon Dawson, what he's been able to do there, if you know Mario Cristobal's background, he's an offensive line guy. He was one himself. That's what he coached, and he wants power running football. Shannon Dawson came from Houston, where he was tempo, spread them out, let's go, and let's throw it. And they've done a great job of merging those two things. And Shannon Dawson's done a really good job of keeping Mario Cristobal happy with, having a two-back system and running the football, but obviously letting Cam Ward do his thing and opening up the offense. And something that the previous offensive coordinator, Josh Gaddis, who came from Michigan and won the Broyles Award, certainly tanked at Miami with kind of this, we're going to spread them out and go after it. And Shannon Dawson has been so much more successful. So it's an interesting race. And obviously there are tons of candidates, but you certainly selected three of the very intriguing guys at the top of the list.
Yeah, and just going back to that, just kind of wrapping it up, Mark, why a big thing that, head coaches are usual and unusual anomalies. Each one of them has their own preference. But again, it's when your head coach is a defensive guy and you're looking for an offensive coordinator, it's a lot easier to let go of the reins. But like you said, Day had a very difficult time at first being able to ease off the brakes. And not be able to call the plays. And I think that having Hartline in that position would make that transition a lot less easier, because he's already seen it's a proven fact. Bringing in another offensive coordinator, like Dawson, like Stein, I don't necessarily think that would be an easy handoff for Day. I feel like he would still want to be not totally bought, but I don't think he would be as comfortable removing himself as much. And how will that affect the continuity and the culture? We have to remember that as much as we talk about X and O's here, we talk about relationships, but we talk about that those off the field things that we don't always get to see, those transitions. We talk about it, behind the scenes a lot, how there's a lot of, I hate to use the word conflict, but coaches all have their different perspectives, different opinions, and sometimes that can trickle down. So that's also another factor to take into it. Like I said, Dawson, Stein got proven records. We know what they can bring. They're excellent recruiters. They're proven developers. But again, Ohio State's trying to keep their winning record. They're elite. They're elite across the board because, like I said, now that you've overcome all the obstacles to be able to be a national championship, how do you keep doing that year in and year out?
You bring up
Ohio.
You bring up a great
No,
point,
go ahead.
Leanne. So this is the deal. You bring up a really good point because yes, Ryan Day, he's an offensive guy. He's all about offense and running plays and scheming. He's one of the best in the business. But running the program became too much, and he finally relinquished that. And he only felt somewhat comfortable, halfway comfortable doing that because Chip Kelly's his mentor and they've known each other forever. And so he was able to hire somebody that he trusts that he can work with. And this would be the same type of situation. It wouldn't be going out to Will Stein or Shannon Dawson and just somebody that they probably just know in passing from coaches conferences and camps and so forth, that I know you're really good at what you do, but we haven't had a working relationship. He's been working with Brian Hartline since 2018. So they've got a long relationship. And I think that's a great parallel to him relinquishing the offense to Chip Kelly and him having that comfort to do it with Brian Hartline and probably few other people.